I was either 10 or 11, living in a small ranch with thick woods in the backyard, and a fair amount of space between houses. There were only two streetlights, one across the street to the left of my house and one all the way at the end of the street where it begins to curve. It was late at night, about 11:30 or 12, and I couldn't sleep. Most of the time, I would sneak a flashlight into my room and read a book under my blankets until my eyes got heavy. But for some reason, it just wasn't working tonight. I was tossing and turning and simply couldn't sleep. Out of sheer boredom, I decided to look across and see if my neighbor across the street was awake as well. When I pulled back my curtain, the first thing I noticed was the silhouette of a man standing across the street, further behind the streetlight. It was quite dark and I really couldn't see his face, but to see someone out so late at night just standing there was unnerving. I looked at him for a few more seconds, but he didn't seem to be moving. I shrugged and thought that maybe something was wrong with their lawn or their plumbing. I went back to my book, but the thought of the stranger standing across the street just wouldn't leave my mind. This time, when I went to look, I shut off my flashlight first and then peeled back my curtains, just enough for me to slightly see outside. When I glanced across the street for the second time, a cold chill slid down my spine. The man had moved, closer to my neighbor across the street. He was now standing near the edge of their driveway on their lawn, where the streetlight illuminated him better. He was slightly hunched over, and his tall frame made him seem even more intimidating. I had to swallow the lump in my throat and quickly ducked out of view, slowly pushing the curtain back in place. At this point, I was beginning to get scared, a dull pit of fear in my stomach. Nothing's wrong, it's just your imagination, I thought to myself, forcing my head back on my pillow and my book back in my drawer. I was only able to stay still for about 5 minutes before I heard the unmistakable sound of branches and leaves cracking, and I jerked out of bed, my hands feeling cold and clammy. It felt like the stranger was right outside of my window, and it was almost like I could feel the pair of cold, lifeless eyes right on me. I bit my bottom lip, and slowly, almost barely moving, moved aside a tiny portion of my curtain and a low whine bubbled out of my throat. The man was on my lawn, at the edge of my street. Seeing him now across the street was horrifying, and I realized that this wasn't my neighbor. It was some freak stranger getting closer and closer to my house. And so I did what every 10-year-old would have done. I ran to my parents' room. My mother and father slept in separate rooms, and this entire week my dad was away at a funeral. So I bolted into my mom's room, only to screech to a halt and drop to my knees when I saw my mom had her blinds cracked. I scrambled across the floor until I was out of visible range and quickly glanced outside one last time, just to make sure that I really wasn't seeing things, and then lurched away from the window. He was now walking down my front yard, moving in a slow, lurching gait, his head still bowed. I slapped at my mom's covers, my voice starting at a whisper and gradually increasing to a small cry. After what seemed like an eternity, my mother woke up, and as soon as I told her what I had seen, she threw the covers aside and pushed apart the blinds, frantically searching the front yard. After a few nerve-wracking moments, she finally looked down at me and said, "There's no one there, honey." I slammed my face against the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and she was right. There was no one there. My mother did call the cops and they swept the front and backyard of my house, but said that there was no trace of anyone ever being there. However, a few nights ago, my neighbors down the street had reported a break-in at around the same time. I was full of unanswered questions. Who was the stranger? Why did he leave and where did he go? And most importantly, Where was he now? Now, almost 6 years later, I can surely say that I've never had such an encounter as that one night. It happened 8 years ago during the summer. A little backstory there. I was at my mom's house, but she barely lived there anymore. She spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I came back at my house during the holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors, a living room and kitchen on the first floor, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The kitchen and the living room had 2 door windows opening on a large terrace, and from the terrace you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use the ground floor, as it was very dark due to these small windows, and it was basically a garage and an office to do our homework. Like I said, it was summer, very hot, and I had just discovered Game of Thrones and I had 2 seasons to watch. Every evening, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace near the kitchen, and watched an episode or 10. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see very well my terrace and my garden from the balconies. Some working men were there for a couple of days now, and were working late, so I often see them while I watch my series in the evening. They were minding their own business, and so did I, so I didn't think much of it. One morning, I was sleeping late and my sister woke me up whispering, "Wake up, there's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heavy heat of that summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs, practically running. I know this is a dumb thing to do, a half-naked, helpless young woman, but I'm very protective of my little sister and I didn't feel any fear at this point. I went down to the kitchen and couldn't find a sharp knife, so I took a fork. Absurd, I know. Well, I asked her where she saw him. She told me that she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch and finding herself in front of him, a tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor, where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" He didn't answer and just walked quietly back into the kitchen where the door window was wide open, and took the stairs back to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran in the backyard with my harmless weapon, to my gate in front of our garden. I even went into the street looking for him. I'm sure if I would have found him, I wouldn't have been so brave anymore and I might have peed myself. But there was no one. And that's when I saw my computer missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. And that was the scariest part because it meant either he was in the house for quite some time before, took the laptop, and came back to do whatever the heck he planned to do, or there was another person in here. I put some decent clothes on and I took my sister to the police station nearby. I was very angry with the policeman. She was a minor, so I stayed with her. She told them everything and described the guy with a lot of details. They asked her if she could recognize him and she said, yeah, without a doubt. They said it would be highly unlikely that they find him, and that you should be thankful that you and your sister weren't hurt. And like she needed to be frightened more than she already was. They wrote in the deposition that she was too shaken up and couldn't recognize the man, even though she had said the contrary multiple times. We never heard from them. When we came back in the house, she was very scared and I was very angry with the loss of my very expensive laptop. I needed it for art school and had all my photos in there, and the attitude of the police. We both sat in the terrace and talked about what had happened, and how lucky we were that she saw that man before he came upstairs. And this is when I noticed that the working men weren't there anymore. From the streets, no one can ever know that we have a backyard, and another entry in the house. My sister told me it was acting like he knew a bit of the house. Maybe it was the first time and we didn't notice, we never know. I'm certain it was one of those men working in the neighbor's balcony who had been watching me that broke in the morning. From that day, we double-locked the doors and slept in the same bed for weeks. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple of video games, and stayed up way too late. It was about 2 a.m. I think when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily at the time we were in his kitchen at the back of the house, so no one could see us. We were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured it was just some drunk person and that they would go away soon. After 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door and yelling that neither of us could understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both scared. He texted his mom, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. We didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based on past experiences with cops in our small town being not the best. At this point, we turned off the kitchen light and were ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anyone that we knew. I army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and I peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There is also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room through, so I was very careful not to be seen. I couldn't see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and had gray hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do. We heard the knocking stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around back, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissors for to check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door. I saw the man staring through the window, hands cupped against the glass, and I made eye contact with him the moment that he saw me, and I loudly said, "Crap," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone. He told me later that he was texting his mom to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more of what he said. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm going to kill you," in there a couple times. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbors seemed to notice him, but no such luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. It's a confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. We pulled out the fridge to get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still terrified. I start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together the best that I can for Jay, who was also on the verge of breaking. We hear a gunshot and the shattering of glass above us, and I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I look at each other terrified. We hear loud footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and run around there for a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture, I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jay's mom pulls into the driveway, which scares the guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and run to greet his mom, never happier to see her. She was shocked by the state of the house and hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by how close we were to being hurt. We were all scared after that. After that night, they had better security installed and we went over a safety protocol if anything ever happened again. Luckily, it hasn't happened again yet, although when I go to his house I'm still scared. And we never called the police because we know there wasn't much that they could even do. We just cleaned up and moved on. This happened a couple of years ago when I was 16. It was a warm summer night. At nights like these, me and my friend would often grab a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of beer each, and go outside to enjoy them. We come from a really small town where everybody is somehow connected, so the only way to drink or smoke without our parents knowing was to do so in secluded places. Luckily, the town is surrounded with huge forests, and we were both very familiar with them since we practically grew up there. This one time, it was a night as usual. We both grabbed our forbidden contraband, some flashlights, and we headed out. We took the path through the long meadow which ended at the edge of the forest. From there led a path through the forest by which it's a 20-minute walk back to town in steep downhill terrain. At the place where the meadow and the forest meet, there is a gazebo with a fireplace where people go for picnics. As we were walking through the meadow, we would stop a few times to ensure from afar that the gazebo was unoccupied. It was around 11 p.m. and the night was incredibly dark. Even though we were out in the open, we had to use our flashlights to see anything. When we made sure that the air was clear, we approached the gazebo to light our first cigarette. We were just standing there, puffing and talking, while always scouting our surroundings with the beams of our flashlights. After maybe 5 minutes, we decided to take the path through the forest back to town. We walked about 30 meters, at which point we couldn't see the place where we were previously standing. That's when we heard it. From the gazebo where we were standing just seconds earlier came a long, terrifying scream. It sounded as if somebody, a man by the sound of it, was being cut to pieces while still very much alive. The kind of scream that turns your blood to ice instantly. After the first scream, there is a pause for a few seconds. During this time, we were both so scared we couldn't even move. And then it started again, even louder and more terrifying. The second scream snapped us back to reality. Without a word, we just started sprinting through the rough terrain, not once looking back. At this point, I was so pumped up with adrenaline that I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat resonating in my ears. We'd never run faster than that, and we didn't stop until we reached the lights of town. When we finally did, we both just sat on a sidewalk under a lamppost, panting and gasping for air. Nobody said anything for a good 30 minutes, until from my friend came a single but quite elegant word. Crap. After a while we started talking about it. We came up with the conclusion that either somebody was having fun at our expense, or somebody got really hurt. At the end, we decided to head back there the first thing in the morning. But surprise, surprise, no signs of anyone being injured or anyone struggling. We decided that it was just someone playing pranks on us. However, to this day, it keeps gnawing at me. Something just doesn't add up. We were standing there for quite some time, so the person must have been very well hidden. On the other hand, it would be almost impossible for anyone to just walk in there without any light since it was so dark. And even if he had some kind of torch, we would certainly spot him. Anyway, screaming man in the forest. Let's not meet. Update. I'm 100% sure that it wasn't an animal. As I previously mentioned, I spent a good portion of my life in those woods, so I am familiar with the local fauna. There is nothing around these parts that could have made that noise. I am absolutely positive it was the scream of a man. One time, I went to the bar with one of my friends. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to many bars up to that point. My friend was drinking on the way to the bar, so he was already pretty drunk when we got there. When I sat at the bar, a cute girl came and talked to me and my friend. She said that her name was Candace, and I noticed she had really bright red hair. I assumed she had dyed it. It was pretty but unnatural. Anyways, this girl was flirting with me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk. To be honest, I played along like I was drunk already too, since it seemed to be working for my friend. I didn't know if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her that we didn't have much money. But she offered to buy us drinks. She kept buying us drinks, and I started to get confused as to who she liked between me and my friend. My friend went to the bathroom. Before he came back, he was kicked out by the bouncers because he was too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him. She kept telling him to go home with her. He was so out of it that he could barely answer her. I told her that he was too drunk and that I couldn't let him go anywhere. I didn't want him to wake up hungover in some random house with no car and no idea what had happened. But Candace kept pushing it, saying that she would take care of him, but I told her no because I had to stay with him. I was more sober than him and he was my responsibility. I told her the only way that he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. I assumed she thought I was just being jealous, but my friend could barely stand and had lost interest in Candace already at that point. So, she immediately started to flirt with me, and offered to get my friend a taxi to drive him home, and said that we could go to her place alone. At this point, I had a few drinks and I was pretty buzzed, so I agreed. We took my friend to a taxi and walked to her car. I slightly stumbled on the way to her car. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said, smiling as she held onto my arm. "Yeah," I said. I don't know why, but I just felt slightly shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easy for me, so I felt uneasy. We got in her car and we drove down the street. "Want to stop at the liquor store and get something more to drink? I'll buy it so you don't have to worry about paying," she offered. I didn't want to drink any more than I already did. I was already buzzed and wanted to be able to carry myself throughout the rest of the night. Sometimes I made myself look stupid when I'm drunk, so I didn't want to ruin anything with Candace more than I already had, when I told her that my friend was already too drunk. I told her that I was already drunk enough, but she insisted. I didn't want to seem lame, so I told her to give me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went in the store and came out with a lot more than just a pint. I assumed that she had wanted to drink more also, so that's why she got a fifth instead of a pint. But on the car ride, we passed the bottle back and forth, but she only took tiny sips. I tried to take tiny sips, but she kept passing me the bottle and telling me to drink. I somehow had managed to drink all of my apple juice and to pretend to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor in the apple juice bottle. I tossed the apple juice bottle full of liquor out the window before she had seen it. I didn't want her to know I was acting drunker than I was, so she actually believed I was sloppy drunk when I was simply buzzed. I took a couple more sips of liquor and finished the bottle. Throughout the car ride, I called her the wrong name a couple of times to get a reaction out of her. She didn't react to it. She just kept letting me call her Carla without correcting me. For some reason, I thought she lied to me about her name initially. We drove up to her house. I pretended to trip and stumble into her front door. She helped me walk inside by holding me up. She opened her front door, which was unlocked. We walked in her house and she closed her front door and then locked it. I thought that was strange, but assumed she didn't want anyone walking in on us. I told her that I'd use the bathroom. I walked into her bathroom, locked the door, and looked in the mirror. I just felt strange. I felt like something was off. I felt myself becoming more drunk from finishing the bottle earlier. I turned on the sink to make noise and made myself puke up the liquor that I drank. I flushed it and went to the sink and started drinking the tap water out of my hands to sober up. I just didn't want to be drunk, but I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I wanted to pretend to be drunk. I turned the sink off and I could hear her talking to someone. "He's drunk as hell. He can barely stand up. You do it." Who was she talking to and to do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. The moment that I stepped into the living room, I saw her walking into another room. All I could see was the back of her head. That strange, very bright red hair go into another room. I didn't see her face or anything. I just saw her kind of walk fast into the room. The living room was pretty dark. "Hey, where are you going?" I slurred like I was drunk. She walked back into the dark living room and up to me. "Let's go in my room," she said. I looked at her bright red hair and then into her eyes. They were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. And that's when I realized it. It was another girl with the same wig on. It was the wig the whole time. She had changed it with the girl from earlier for whatever reason. My heart felt like it had stopped. But I tried to look like I had no idea it was a different girl. I kind of smiled at her and told her I just needed to use the bathroom one more time and told her sorry I was so drunk. She said, "It's fine, just hurry up in here." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I heard her whisper something to someone again. This time I think I heard a male voice whisper back. I honestly didn't concentrate on listening to exactly what she had said. Something sketchy was going on and I had to get out of that house. I opened the bathroom window and jumped straight out of it and ran faster than I have ever ran in my life. I didn't look behind myself or anything. I just ran through the backyard, jumped the fence and ran through someone else's backyard, hit a road and then ran down towards the main road. I kept running down the main road until I saw a CVS and I ran into it and stood straight at the front of the store in front of the camera. I called a taxi and then I went home. I tried to think back on what happened that night. What was she or they planning that night? Why did she tell me a fake name? Why was she trying to get my friend and I so drunk? I thought maybe a robbery, but she kept spending money on us. She kept buying us drinks and even paid for my friend's taxi cab. And mostly, why did she wear a wig that she gave to another girl to wear? Who was she talking to? What did it mean? And what was in that room that they tried to lure me into? The next day after this incident, I went back to the house with a couple of friends to see just what was going on. Nobody was there. No cars, no people, nothing. Just an empty house. I ended up finding out that that house was a summer rental, and whoever those people were, they had broken into that house and used it for only that night, and they never came back. As a kid, I lived in a pretty typical suburban neighborhood in a ranch-style house. My bedroom was at the front corner of the house, with a window that faced the street and a window that faced the house next door. I was 11 or 12 at the time, and I shared the room with my younger sister. We had bunk beds, and I liked to sleep on the bottom bunk. From the position of my bed, I could see through the window that looked out at the street. I woke up one night to a thud at my front window. I was immediately on edge. I was always a paranoid kid. Knowing full well that I wouldn't sleep, I laid there petrified. It seemed like hours, but what was likely a few minutes later, a man's face appeared through the crack in my curtain. I could see it so clearly in my mind, even to this day. I saw the shadow of his hands through my thin curtain cupped around his face, and what I'm assuming was his attempt to see in the window better, and his eyes, nose, and mouth were completely clear through the crack. I cried there for a few minutes, unable to move, while he shifted a few times trying to see more clearly into my bedroom. I got the courage to slip out of my bed as quickly and quietly as I could, and I ran into my parents' room to wake up my dad. At first, my father tried to attribute the noise to the large lilac bush at the corner of the house, of which the branches would occasionally tap on my window when it was breezy and the bush was overgrown. I cried and told him about the man. When he had woke up all the way and realized what I was saying, he leapt from bed and ran outside. The man was nowhere to be seen. My dad told me that it must have been a nightmare, that the window would be too tall for anyone to look in anyway, and he ushered me back to my room. I didn't sleep. The next morning, we realized a planter pot had been pulled over from the front porch to underneath my front window to be stood on. a piece of the concrete window frame was broken off, and we could clearly see the place where someone's forehead and nose had been in contact with the window. Luckily, nothing else ever came of this. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths that we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and we would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to the rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we had managed to run off path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the planted darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-sized motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance that we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated what these people could be. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times that we had been through. And honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. And besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you, come on out." We stayed silent, deciding to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and they smashed a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path that we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and pass, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point that he had started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear that I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us, while basically only being covered in leaves and plants, may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of two main roads, far from where we had started. I ducked down into the ditch to call for help. While I opened my phone, I noticed that I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and he was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the two streets that we were near the corner of, and explained that we needed to be picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the backseat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that had happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving had started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. Before I begin, I should state this was a few years ago and I'm a tiny woman. Back at this time, I looked like a teenager, so I've always been mindful that I seem an easier target or easier to fool. I had seen a job interview for a small business looking for a secretary. No experience needed, as they would provide on-the-job training, and as that's the kind of thing I was looking for, I applied. I heard back quickly and I was invited for an interview. When I arrived, I was excited. It was a bit of a drive from my home, but it was in a beautiful old building, on the 3rd floor with a modern layout inside, though you could tell it was very new, as it was bare bones and very little had been unpacked. Still though, if you have to work somewhere, it might as well be in a nice building, right? Anyway, the interview seemed normal. I only encountered female members of staff, and they were all warm and lovely. The woman interviewing me was amazing and even sat talking to me for a while after getting to know me. When I got home, I wasn't in the door long before I got a phone call from them. I had nailed the interview. Awesome, I thought, and I was offered the job. I was about to accept when I was told on the phone, "Okay, you'll come in tomorrow and we'll have the van drive you to where you'll be working." And I was like, what? Confused at what they meant. They then told me that I would be meeting with customers on their behalf and talking, selling stuff. I was not comfortable with this, as it wasn't what I was interviewed for, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had had a second position they thought I would fit in better with. It wouldn't be that weird as a new company, and while it wasn't what I was comfortable with, I should hear them out. So I asked more questions and the woman on the other end of the line was getting more snippy and tense. Gone was the nice friendly woman from earlier, and she would not reveal where I would be going or who I would be meeting. By this point, plenty of red flags were going off, so I declined the offer. For anyone curious about what happened after, I reported this as it seemed very dodgy. But when they were checked in on, the floor was no longer occupied by them. They had apparently just rented it for a weekend. They were gone.